This is kind of an interesting question or comment. Is Kirby Smart already a better coach than Steve Spurrier? And we're going to go through this one for a little bit. And I know some Florida folks are going to get triggered by it, but they also have gotten their ass whipped a few times by Kirby. So they know just what the Georgia folks felt like from Steve Spurrier at the beginning of his tenure there. Steve was only at Florida for, it felt longer than it was. It felt longer than I think people remember. I mean, he was at South Carolina for an extended period of time. One, two. He was at Carolina for one season fewer than he was at Florida. So um, I think people forget just how short a brief a period of time it was that he was at Florida and how much he won at Florida. I mean, he only had 3 seasons, Steve Spurrier, where he didn't win 10 games or more. Um, but I think it's a real relevant question coming off of uh, Kirby Smart and Georgia's first national championship of his tenure. You can celebrate that national championship. Make sure you're doing it too. You can get it. You can still get it on this first run. Don't miss out on the first run of books, y'all. This has really been an exciting project for us. And if you order now, you're still going to get in on the first orders, which will be delivered in probably in really early March, maybe late February. But order now, or you're going to miss out on that window. So let's delve into this just a little bit. Steve Spurrier in his first, now Kirby's only been at Georgia for 6 full seasons. Okay, so we got a little bit of apples and oranges. Spurrier's first 7 seasons at Florida, he had 83% winning percentage. That is astronomical. Kirby is at 81. Okay, excuse me, yeah, 81. Steve Spurrier's seventh year was when he won the national championship. Georgia, Kirby won it in his sixth. Steve Spurrier. Now, we're talking about different eras of college football here. I never thought I would say that about the 1990s, but Steve was at Florida before Kirby even played at Georgia. So it certainly it's a different period of time. Um, and Steve never had a bad season, if you want to call 2016 bad at Georgia. He never had a five-loss season in his time at Florida. So he went 9-2, 10-2, 9-4, which is pretty close to 8-5, 11-2, 10-2 and 1, 12-1 and 12-1, getting blown out in the national championship game in his sixth season, and of course winning it all against the Noles, backing into it, but winning it all in his seventh season. Kirby went 8-5, 13-2, 11-3, 12-2, 8-2, 14-1. I don't know what Kirby's percentages would be if you took away the first season at Georgia, but I can do that math as we go here too. But well, what do you think? I mean, you tell me down below um, what your kind of from your vantage point, are they the same type of coach? And for the record, Kirby is sitting at 85% winning percentage without that first season. But we're not going to do that. That's not how it works. You're going to have to take it all. I also think that Kirby inherited a program at Georgia that was relatively mature in a way that, like the 1989 Gator team was coming off. I mean, the 1990 Gator team was coming off back-to-back 7-5 seasons. They were not, great. And in Georgia, in 16, they had won 10 games. In 15, excuse me, in 15, they had won 10 games. In 14, they had won 10 games. So you're talking about a program that was basically trying to get to full maturity, which is winning a national championship. And, you know, that was not something that you had at Florida. I mean, Steve really took them much further along than they had been. He had taken Florida to maturity the way that it should have been, um, much more than it had been. That's for sure. But which one is better? And are you going to make the argument that Kirby has started faster than Spurrier? You could make that argument. I mean, you could make that argument for sure. You could also say, well, Kirby is dealing with the greatest college football run of all time, which is Nick Saban at Alabama. Florida didn't deal with that. No, they did not. But they did deal with Bobby Bowden at Florida State. And, that was a rough run for Spurrier. He really did have a hard time with the Noles. So to suggest that there wasn't something in Spurrier's way would be wrong. When you take a look at, and man, these orders are already coming in for the book. I really appreciate y'all doing that as you watch these videos. If you take a look at the beginning of the thing, I mean, Spurrier started out 4-1 against Florida State. I mean, including the season that they won the national championship, they got smoked by Florida State. Um, excuse me, that is not quite correct. I misspoke when I said that. They lost to Florida State in 1990. So this is kind of a how do you put it? They had a weird dynamic between the two teams, and they split the first two games that Spurrier was down there, and then they started getting beat pretty good. I mean, they got smoked in '92. They got beat up pretty good in '93. They tied in '94, and then played the rematch and got beat in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. And then in '95, the Gators beat them by 11, go and play for the national championship, and get smoked by Nebraska. And then it was the game in Tallahassee in '96 where the Noles won that thing by 3. And then Florida backs their way into the national championship and then just drills Florida State 52-20. I mean, that game was not competitive at all. And then, Spurrier had a hard time beating Bobby Bowden. I think that's one of the few coaches that he just didn't do well against. And of course, modern Florida State is not at all like Florida State before the turn of the century. So they both did have challenges coming into it, but I think they are very good comparisons. I'm not sure it's it's harder to give Kirby credit for the longevity that Steve had at Florida because he's not had that yet, right? I mean, he's not had the longevity that Spurrier had. I mean, Steve Spurrier had 2 decades of success in the two decades plus of success in the SEC. I mean, he is arguably the second or third best coach in all time in SEC history. Nobody's going to talk like that about Kirby Smart. Um, I don't think. There's been a lot of guys, including Spurrier, who won one national championship in the SEC. You know, you talk about Gene Stalling, Steve Spurrier. I'm just going off the top of my head. Vince Dooley, Gene Chizik won one national championship. Ed Orgeron. What would really separate you, and I think Spurrier is in this category, even though it didn't happen, is a multiple national championships from an SEC school. I do think that will happen at Georgia. I don't think it will necessarily happen in 2022. I'm not putting it out of the possibility of happening by 2024 though. But I think the difference between Vince, you can't even really put Vince. I would put Vince more in the category of just underneath Spurrier, Vince Dooley, than you would put him with Gene Chizik and Ed Orgeron. I mean, those are not the same thing at all, or Les Miles. I mean, Les Miles and Vince have a lot more in common than they do with Gene Chizik and Ed Orgeron, or guys that just kind of won it once, even though they won it once. So, um, Urban has got to be up there, but his period of time was as long as Kirby's been at Georgia, and that's it. I mean, he was there 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. That's it. He won 2 national championships. He backed into one of them. Still counts. But, and they totally dominated the Noles. I mean, they lost to Florida State his final season there, but that was it. They didn't just dominate them, and they whipped their ass the whole time. And Georgia doesn't. Georgia's biggest rival is Florida, right? We know that. But um, the thing that's in their way the most is Bama. Whereas for the Gators in Steve Spurrier's era, their biggest rival was Florida State at the time. Okay. It's obviously over the history of the world, Florida's biggest rival is Georgia. But in that period of time, Florida State had become a national power and won 2 national championships. Okay. You can't, I mean, all situations are not the same, but what Kirby's dealing with now is someone being in their way that's not a rival. And you know what? you can post all you want to about how Georgia and Alabama are rivals. They are not rivals. Georgia has 3 rivals. That's it. They can't have 12. Okay? Georgia can't be rivals with, it's not the same. It's not the same that you say Georgia's rivals with Alabama and Clemson, and it's the same as their rivalry with Tech, Auburn, and Florida, because it's not. Because they're not rivals with South Carolina. And Tennessee ain't Tech. It's not the same. You've got rivalries and big games, and for the Gators of Steve Spurrier's era, you had the rivalries, which for them was Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida State, and then you also had games against LSU, which is now a rivalry, but was not then. I know this is complicated at times, but for Georgia, they can't have rivalries with everybody, and neither can the Gators. Florida's game with Kentucky is not a rivalry; it's just a game they play every year. So I do think, after getting off the track there, that if I were Florida, and now you got Billy down there, Billy Napier, the head coach, I don't know if you figured it out. I don't know if Florida's gone the way they need to compete in a major way with Georgia. I think they will still win games. We will have to see how it goes, but I got to tell you, I think over a 10-year period against the Dogs, that Dan Mullen would have won more games than Billy Napier. But you know, I, we'll just see. I thought Mullen would have hung in there for 3 or so wins in a 10-year period, and we don't know. Maybe Billy Napier will win 7 against Georgia, but it doesn't seem like that right here off the start. Um, but with Spurrier, you knew from the jump that guy was pretty good. And you know, with Georgia and excuse me, with Kirby, after the first season, I mean, it was pretty evident that they were pretty good. You know, Spurrier got the Gators into the top 10 by October. I mean, they weren't ranked coming into the season. Georgia was ranked coming into 2016, and they fell backwards after that loss to Ole Miss and then the miracle from Tennessee. But that season, they beat a top 10 team in Auburn. And, I got to say, I thought it was a pretty good year. The big thing that happened for them is the return of like Nick and Sony and those guys. But Spurrier beat top 4 Auburn. Um, that was a good season for them. But who do you think is the better coach as it stands today? I think it's a completely natural comparison. People always compare Kirby to Nick Saban, and I don't think those are the same thing. You can't compare Kirby's start at Georgia to Nick's start at Alabama, because Nick had been a head coach for, I don't know, 10 years before that. It's not the same. So this was Spurrier had been a head coach too, but I think it's a little more, the parallels are more similar. Anyway, you tell me what you think, and while you're doing that, make sure that you're clicking DAWGSTRUCTION down below. We want to make sure that we get as many orders before I send this thing in, so we cover our bases and we can get the thing rolling to y'all as fast as possible. Order it now. I appreciate it. It is worth your time and money. Thanks for watching. We'll see you over on the website.